Welcome everybody along to another episode of Fit Matters, the place where fit professionals talk about all things fit related. And today we have a good one. Today I'm going to be talking with Dr. Nuno Gana. Nuno Gana is just an incredibly smart man, a great researcher, and he's going to be bringing us up to date on some of the stuff he's been looking at with bicycle seats. And we're going to jump right into it. I've got Nuno on the line here, and we are going to bring him in. And there we go. Nuno, are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Do you hear any feedback at all?
No feedback at all. We think we're good in the worlds of technology. Nuno, and I've been taking Nuno around the internet because my email server went down, so we relied on various other ways to contact us, but luckily here we are. And thanks for coming along again, Nuno, to talk about all things seats.
Yeah, no worries.
What's been going on in your part of the world?
Well, it's raining. As you know, I'm in Glasgow, Scotland, so it's raining and it's 5 degrees. And oddly enough, people are getting ready for the Kelpman, which is a brutal triathlon in 6 weeks. So I've been getting a lot of people with saddle issues, actually. Yeah.
Oh, wow. What's that event? Tell me more about the event. It's
a triathlon, but they have to cycle 200 Ks.
Ooh.
And but they climb 4,000 meters on those 200 Ks.
Wow.
And then they have to run, and then they run the marathon in gravel trails, up the mountains, down the mountains here in Scotland. It's a brutal triathlon. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds pretty wild. What's the swim distance?
I think it's 4K, 3.8, same thing. Okay. But you don't go uphill on the swimming, so you know.
Yeah, the swimming's mainly downhill.
And no, the stream.
Based on where you are,
so there's no.
You're on the curve.
Yeah, it's in a lake. So the only thing is the wind. If there's wind, it becomes a little bit more difficult on the lake. But other than that, it is the cycling that creates the most problems, because there's a balance that you have to do, and with this triathlon, it's 200 Ks uphill, right? So as you know from the drag equation, the velocity is cubed. So as you reduce the speed, you reduce the drag influence. So I mean, I keep telling them, look, the average speed you're going to do is going to be much less than what you usually do. So let's bring you up. Because you still have to run the marathon on gravel and on those trials. So
right.
Yeah.
Open that hip angle up a bit.
Yeah. Open the hip angle. Take care of the saddle. And make sure you're comfortable for climbing, because there are saddles that are good, you know, on the road bike and on triathlon.
Yep.
And there are saddles that work on the road bike and saddles that only work on the triathlon bike. But with this triathlon,
Wow, sounds like a hell of an event. So especially at this time of year as well, with weather playing such a big part so early in the season.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, here we are to talk about seats, and it's interesting that we use the language. And one of the things you and I spoke about earlier on was the language regarding seats, and I keep having to catch myself, because you know we've both been doing this for quite a long time. Is that using the term seat because instead of the term saddle, because when we look at a bicycle, we have the seat tube and we have the seat post. And then what goes on top of the seat post should be the seat. And when you think about a saddle as such as something that goes on a horse or a bull, and a saddle tends to sit you in one really fixed position. You know, they're designed with a scoop to them, so you sit down into them. And a bicycle seat seems to be a little bit different to that.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly catching myself trying to use that term more often, seat, bicycle seat. And the interesting thing is, just when we talk about saddles, it's something I always say to people is people talk about riding a bike, but we also ride bulls and we ride horses. And in that situation, the animal is in charge. And so when you're on a bicycle, the bicycle should not be in charge. You should be driving a bicycle in the same way you drive a car. So that's another sort of, verbiage we're going to use to change that discussion about, what it is that we're sitting on top of when we're on a bicycle. But that sort of leads us into, I know you've been doing a lot of research recently on seats and seat preference and seat position and something like that. And it's certainly, as a fit professional positioning riders, it seems to be that the seat gets the arse end of the deal, to use some colloquial terminology, because it gets blamed for a lot of things, right?
It does get blamed. Going back to the terminology, back in the 19th century, when Baron invented the bicycle, they actually had a saddle on it. It was a saddle. It was a horse saddle. It was just a wooden tube with a horse saddle on top of it, and they would kind of jog on top of the early bicycle. So I think that's where it comes from. I think seat is a much more accurate description of what it is. It's a seat. It's a bicycle seat.
Right. I always say that if bar stools were shaped like bicycle seats, we'd have far less drunks, because you'd just fall off them when you'd had too many to drink.
Exactly. The saddle gets a lot of blame because, out of the contacts on the bicycle, it's where you put the most pressure. It's where you put the most weight. That's
well, hang on. It's where you should put the most weights. Where a lot of people have a lot of pressure in the wrong places, right? That's why they see professionals like us.
Yeah.
But it's a non-anchored contact point.
Yeah, as are all of them. As the cleats have the float, even if the cleats don't have float, the foot moves within the shoe. Hands move all about the handlebars, and the saddle too. The saddle moves a lot. Do I have a hip? Where's my hip? I've got a hip here. Hold on.
Okay.
The saddle moves a lot.
Right.
You got rotations on this axis. Got rotations on this axis, and I recently found from that study that I was doing with X-rays that we have different rotations on this axis as well that happen while we ride the saddle.
Yep.
So, and this one, arguably for me, is the one that potentially causes the most damage, because these are shearing forces within the soft tissue, and that's shearing forces within soft. You're gonna just ruin the soft tissue and cause a lot of soft tissue damage, more than the other rotations.
Okay, well, let's go back and let's talk about some language then around what we're talking about with bicycle seats, because there's an interesting, I think that's where a lot of the problems start, in how we describe the seat, because of, there's not a lot of language, right? People talk about the seat rail, and we know that's the metal part which connects to the seat clamp, and we know about the nose of the seat. I think we can somewhat agree on the nose of the seat, even though if you talk to a popular saddle company that makes, a seat company that makes seats for triathlon, they say they have a noseless seat.
Yeah, no, that is.
And my discussion is always, well, what do you call the front end if it's not the nose?
There are different types of noses, but it's a nose.
Right. And I think it's really important. This is where, but it's the only element of the saddle's anatomy, and let's call it anatomy, where we actually have a similarity towards the anatomy of the human.
Yeah.
So it's really, I think this opens up a very interesting discussion about using language to describe the seat and how it interplays or relates to the human being. And I've sort of started, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. And I've started being very conscious of what I'm calling it. So if we look at a seat and the nose is the front and the back of the saddle is the back, or whatever we want to call that. But the way the saddle transitions, if we're looking at a saddle in the frontal plane, right? And so for those people who are listening and watching, the frontal plane, we're looking at it straight on. And that's what we're looking at. If you're looking straight down the nose, and we see this curve in the saddle. And the curve in the saddle has a lot of similarities to the shape of the human shoulders. Yeah. And if we look within the body. And so I've started using that terminology and referring to that curve as the shoulder of the saddle. And so in the same way, we can describe, like, it's like going to the Olympic Training Center and you see people in the gym and they've got big, square, wide shoulders and they're tall and slim. And you're like, okay, that's a swimmer. That type of shape suits themselves to one type of sport. But we can have square-shouldered people, and then we can have rounded-shouldered people. And I think that's a really interesting way when you're looking at saddles in that frontal plane to describe what's happening there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can show you the same saddle in two types of shoulders. So we have the same saddle here,
right?
But if I show you like that,
right,
this one is like that and that one's like that. Can you see the difference? That's all.
Yeah. And that's going to totally affect the way in which you position your pelvis on that seat. This
is the most important bit of the saddle. How this tapers down, how the wings or shoulders, I call them wings because it's easier for people to relate to them.
Right.
You see this one much more. I call them wings. I call this the rear of the saddle. I call this the nose or the front of the saddle. Because when I'm doing a fit, and I use a machine that can just, digitally move forwards and backwards.
You're using a DFU?
Say again?
Are you using a DFU?
I'm using a DFU.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. So for those people who aren't familiar with the technology, the DFU is a computerized adjustable size cycle, which is on worm drives or screw drives. And so very, very easily to control the shift of all the axis of the components on the bike.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've developed an R code. I've developed a computer code to... this is off topic, by the way, but just so people know what sort of thing to expect from a biomechanic assessment here, I've developed a code which kind of calculates the geometry, taking into account the head tube angle, taking into account the spacers, how many spacers, including the angle of the stem, the length of the stem, etc., etc., etc. Because you can't just press a button and move forward. So people are just used to jigs, right? People are used to jigs, and you see people with really tiny screwdrivers and going into the jig and it moves backward and forward, right? But they're forgetting the head tube angle, they're forgetting the angle of the stem and the spacers and all that, and suddenly you're being fitted in a bike that doesn't exist.
Correct. Right? I think that's always a danger of having that discussion of it's kind of like the human body, right? When you move one thing, everything moves.
Yeah. So you either use the bicycle of the customer for it, and you swap, and you have like stem sizers and things like this, right?
Yeah.
That you actually can simulate a 100 mil, 200, whatever. Or if you use a jig, you have to do the trigonometry, because there's no point just going there with a screwdriver and because then there's height adjustments and fore-aft adjustments that always need to take into account, because you have two angles: the angle of the head, the angle of the stem.
Well, and also that same point is true when you look at the back of the bike with the seat tube angle.
Exactly.
I'm not ashamed to admit that many times I've positioned people on my sizing cycle, and I've been really, really happy with where they are from a biomechanical standpoint. And then I find out that I've actually got them on a 72-degree seat tube angle with a 38 mil setback seat post, which is just unachievable.
It's a virtual fit, yeah.
Right. So you really being aware of those components is those elements in the
and
trigonometry.
That's the danger of those things. That's the danger of this thing. Not particularly this one, because, well, not if you develop a code to actually know the coordinates, precisely coordinates.
Right.
But if you just touch a button on that one, it'll just move to the place that you want it, but you have to adjust to the rest of the things.
Sure.
And so when I fit people here on that thing, I say, would you like to be seated towards the rear of the saddle or towards the nose of the saddle? Okay, because when they say I'd like to move the saddle forward, what they actually mean is, instead of moving the saddle forward, what they mean is they would like themselves to sit forward. Okay, but that is the same thing as saying moving the saddle backward. Okay, so.
Well, therein lies another discussion, right, of the language around the saddle, because a lot of the time when we look at the industry, they talk about saddles, and the number that the industry use is this arbitrary width measurement at the maximal outside edges of a saddle, which, might be 134 or 143 or 156 or whatever it is. But we know, or I think we understand now, that that measurement is really just an arbitrary measurement. It's an element of marketing from the industry, because that measurement in itself isn't a definitive, because the shape of the other part of the saddle, when we talk about looking in that frontal plane where we can see the shoulders of the saddle, if you're looking in the transverse plane, or looking in plan view down from above, how the saddle transitions from the nose out to those wings or shoulders, that also dictates. The transition, the speed of that transition in combination with the roll of the shoulders, that's essentially what's creating your seated position, or the sweet spot of where you can sit within that saddle. Yeah, and that's where we can see these huge differences.
Yeah. So you're right. So this is a 143 saddle, and it measures 143, and it means nothing, because it does mean, it means it measures 143.
It's 143 wide, sure.
Right. It means that. It means precisely that. Okay, good. We've got that measurement. So what? Then that's the question. So, but we're talking about here something that I've been studying for, in my spare time for the last 2 years, which is categorizing saddles and using a saddle and a category for a saddle. And that's what I'm trying to find. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find categories for saddles. And the point of doing this is that we can use that category system as an outcome measurement, as a clinical outcome for a set of conditions. So you get someone through the door, right? You ask him or her a set of questions that will prioritize some categories of the saddle, okay? And then throughout that prioritization, then you go through the prioritization, picking the saddles that meet those criteria.
Okay.
Picking the saddles that have the categories in the same order as what the subject, what the customer or client picks, and that should be a good match. So that's the point of categorization, and I've been doing that for a long time. I can share with you 2 categories, just an example, just so that people know what we're talking about. And you touched on the nose and you touched on the width. So that's a perfect example, because I analyzed last week. I analyzed data on those 2 categories. Let's say one category is the nose. Mm-hmm. Let's say another category is the width of the saddle. Okay. Can I share my screen? That's all.
Yeah, you can. You can just add screen. If you click on there and go screen share, and you should pop it up.
Okay. So I'm just gonna open up an image for you. Open up several images. So I'm going to try and share a desktop, and I'll be able to pop all of the images in that desktop, and I'll pop them up as we share screen, as we talk.
The joys of technology, right?
No, I can only share this screen. Hold on. Wait. I'm gonna drag you. If I can only share this screen, I'm gonna drag you to a different desktop. Aha! I win. Can you see my screen, right?
So let me just bring this up here, and
Yep.
we'll go to solo view with you. There we go, full screen.
Yeah. So, forget about all the folders. That's just what's in my mind as well. Where's the cluster example of saddles? There you go. Cluster plot. You see that cluster plot?
Right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So what we have here is just a plot of two categories that I think they're good categories. Instead of saying width and length, you could just divide the length by the width, and then you'll have a ratio. So let's use that ratio as a category, and that's
Correct.
what we have on the abscissa, on the x-axis here, down here. Yeah. See that little square? Good.
Yep.
So that's the length to width ratio. So you divide the length of the saddle by its width, and you have a ratio. And you can see things like the Arione has a huge
long
ratio.
saddle. Yep.
Long and thin. And then you have the power. So I highlighted these because these are very well-known saddles, right?
Yes.
The power is short and really wide. Okay. The Arione is long and really narrow. Okay. Good. Now, if you plot those against the nose width, and the nose was measured 2 centimeters from the tip, all of them, yeah.
Okay.
And you plot that against nose width here on the y-axis, and then you get a graphic. Okay, you get like sort of a correlation, not a correlation. I didn't do any statistical.
It's a scatter plot.
You get a scatter plot. Yeah. I didn't do any statistical modeling on them, but just with those two categories, you can see the difference between a power sort of saddle, an Arione, and the Stealth Pro. Okay, so for those who don't know what a Stealth Pro is, and an Arione and a power. So what we have there is the Arione, yeah, versus the Stealth versus the Pro. Yeah?
Right.
Right. And the Arione was on the far right, long and really narrow. Yeah?
Yeah.
And on the far left was this one, short and really wide. Yeah?
The power saddle.
And in the middle, but up there, is this one. Yeah?
Right.
So let's put that graphic again. Let's put that graphic up again. There it is. Yeah.
Right.
So what we see here is that is actually just by plotting that, you can see the mistake Specialized did with their saddles. In my view,
come on. Are you saying the Specialized doesn't do everything perfectly?
No. They actually got this very, very wrong. Very wrong. So wrong. They got this so wrong, and I'm not afraid to say this because I don't care. You see all these saddles? All these saddles here? Some of the companies gave them to me. Some of the companies had me have the dealer price. Specialized said, I'm not working with you because you can either just represent Specialized or we're not going to send you the saddles. So I had to buy this on Sigma Sport or Wiggle or whatever.
Are you suggesting they're trying to control the market?
Let's go back to the scientific basis of the huge mistake. The huge mistake was they did this really nice cutout, and I think they were revolutionary in that. We do need pudendal relief for the pudendal nerve, pudendal artery, blood arteries that supply the perineal region. We need all of that. And yes, we need a cutout. But then what they did was the nose doesn't back up the cutout. So actually, if you sit on the front of this saddle, you're sitting on two blades. Okay. So you either have a hip that does not rotate towards the front, okay, that stays there. And if you stay in the middle towards the rear of the saddle, this is a very good saddle. Okay. So I call this my saddle to go and pick up milk or bread on my Dutch bike, because it's really good on this area. Has a large cutout, good support for your sit bones. But if you go down on the drops, you're going to feel the nose, and it's really, really painful. Now, what I think they realized this, and they came up with a mimic. Yeah. The mimic has a soft tissue in the front. Yeah.
But don't you think that by doing that, what they actually did was they're just putting a Band-Aid on that design? Because I think the issue with that saddle is that the sweet spot, the really sittable area on that saddle, is very, very narrow. By making it so short, they basically closed the window to make this very, very small sweet spot for you to sit on, which is amazing, because I'm across the parking lot from a tier 1 specialized store, and they sell those saddles like candies.
Yeah.
And someone comes in and they're just like, I just can't get comfortable on my saddle. I'm like, no surprise there. It's a very narrow window.
So they have this Power Pro, and they came up with a mimic so that, people actually need to sit in the front with this saddle. So let's come up with a mimic, which is a softer tissue. Let's market it towards women, because the perineal region of women, it's all exposed. They have more nerve endings there. They have more sensibility. The vulva region of women is a lot in more danger of soft tissue damage. So let's make up with a very soft, very, very soft material, which is just even worse.
Yes.
Because now, after half an hour, you're sitting on rails. You're sitting on the shell of the saddle. This is so soft. When you sit on it, you're basically sitting on a plastic saddle because it's so soft.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the graphic, you see what
on.
Stealth did. You see what Pro did with their Stealth. Okay, so we can argue it's more or less the same ratio as the Power Arc, because the Power Arc is not as wide as the Power Pro. Same ratio there, but look at the nose. It's more than 48 millimeters wide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which means that even if they have this saddle without a cutout, it's better. The Power without a cutout should be better, because the summation of these 2 points is less area than just filling it in.
Okay, so let's just take a step backwards on that, and I think it's really important for people to understand the anatomy of what you're sitting on that seat, and the designs of those seats and how they interplay with us. So a lot of people talk about the bike industry throws around this ischial tuberosities sit bone scenario, and if you look at the pelvis, and if you just grab a pelvis there, I don't have one of mine handy, is if the pelvis is vertical, then you're sitting on those ischial tuberosities. But on a bicycle, because of anterior pelvic rotation, you're not sitting on those ischial tuberosities. The weight is being borne forward of the ischial tuberosities onto the pubic rami. And
so if you put an accelerometer on that sacrum,
right, if you look at that angle of of that bony protuberance, those are the rails that you're actually sitting on, and the further you rotate forward, the narrower that spacing becomes, which is similar to the design of a saddle. It's why a saddle slopes in towards the nose. But there's just so many other factors which contribute to where on that bony structure you will bear force, such as existing anterior pelvic rotation or just functional pelvic rotation. Some people can't rotate their pelvis that way, and some people who have compromised sort of pelvic floor stability might actually just fall forward onto the maximal area of that bony structure.
Yeah.
There's just so much which interplays there, but the easiest thing I think that the industry does is they just go, oh, well, we're going to measure your sit bones on the arseometer, and that's going to be the saddle that you need because, it's just there's so much misleading information out there about the elements.
I have a very strong opinion about that. Saddle choice is not guided by the ischial tuberosities, the distance between the ischial tuberosities at all. So I have this research is being developed into several fields. I'm designing a cluster algorithm to pick up categories, because I want to make sure that my categories are real, okay? And for that, I need the cluster algorithm to actually say, this is a group, you can make this a category. This is a group, you can make this a category, okay? But then and this is the engineering bit of saddles. The other bit is the medical side of it, which I can share with you a couple of images. I'm still writing the paper, it's not out yet. And I don't want to share too much, because then it'll compromise the peer review, okay? So I don't know if one of the editors is watching this or not. And he'll know it's me, and he won't like my head or my glasses, and he'll say, I don't like this dude, so I'm not going to accept his paper. So can you see that?
Yeah, yep.
So you touched on the angle of the ischial tuberosities, and you touched on actually the rami, the ischial rami, and you touched on where do we sit on the saddle. So in this figure here, you can actually see that we sit on the saddle on the ischial tuberosities, okay? We do. But how can that be? Well, this person here, on this condition, the sacrum, so I put an accelerometer on everyone. You see that on the X-ray?
Yeah.
That's the accelerometer. So I've put an accelerometer because I wanted to know the actual angle, right? So this person is sitting at 86 degrees, 86. Okay?
Wow, pretty vertical.
It's upright, okay? This is upright. Now, 86 degrees, we'll never have a perfect 90 degrees because you'd have to sit back because of the natural curve of the spine closer
the
to
lordosis, of the lumbar spine.
Lordosis closest to. So, okay, so when they say, oh, no, 90 degrees, no, it's not. It's more close to 80 when you're really upright off the bar, just standing upright. As you go far forward towards the TT position, the distance between here and the saddle decreases a lot, to a point that we no longer touch the saddle with the ischial tuberosities. Okay. So that's
where do you think that angle occurs, Nuno?
As soon as, so what's the threshold?
Where do you think the transition happens? Yeah, how far into that rotation do you think?
I don't have the figures, but around 60 degrees, you already not on the ischial tuberosities at all. And 60 degrees is very straight. 60 degrees is what you do in a Dutch bike. Okay. Right. Because you can ride the Dutch bike with your hands off the handlebars, and that's that position there. As soon as you put your hands on the handlebars, you're already at 60, 50 degrees. Okay. So you're already on the rami here. That's one thing. Yes. So that's the first thing that I think we could inform the industry or the people that make saddles, is that, or better yet, the people that make those tools to find your perfect saddle. Go online and I'm a rider of this height and I ride like this, so this is your perfect saddle.
You mean a bull or a snake or a toad or a giraffe, right?
Yeah. Or a chameleon,
very useful. Very useful categorization.
Yeah. And then you buy the saddle and it's excruciatingly painful because the categories are wrong. The categories should be other categories, okay? And so we should inform, okay, fine. Measure the ischial tuberosities. That's okay to measure the ischial tuberosities. It takes 30 seconds less.
Well, okay? And it's a very easy anatomical landmark to measure.
Right. And you know how wide it is. You can cross-check that against the height, and you get a sense of if that person which is tall will have a small ischial tuberosities, or that person which is not as tall will have a height. You can have these sorts of measurements. When you start doing that, you build an image of the population in your area. Okay. and you get a sense of if this person which has that height and I divide that by the ischial tuberosities, I can more or less understand if that saddle is going to have, if that person is going to have a acute angle or a wider angle, okay? And this is the most important bit, because the angle is what dictates what sort of saddle you should sit on. Well, I shouldn't say the angle dictates this, because what dictates the saddle are the categories, okay? But the angle has to be in one of them. And that's what we see here. It's this saddle, which was matched to this individual. The angle is good, okay? The angle matched the angle of the wings, okay? And so these are two categories that we have to take into consideration. I don't know how we can do that yet, but I do know that it's better to waste time trying saddles than to measure the ischial distance.
Right.
That's my take.
But so let me ask you this question then. Of somebody who, and typically we see a lot of this population, be it triathletes or cyclists who have overly tight anterior line, be that being driven by the quadriceps or by the hip flexors themselves, who live in this constant degree of anterior pelvic rotation. How is that impacting where they're sitting on the saddles relevant to the ischial tuberosity spacing?
So let me get a TT sign.
Because, like a lot of things, when positioning somebody on a bike, your function is going to take your form to a very large degree. Would you agree with that statement, Nuno?
So say again. So you're saying that. So what was the last statement?
Well, someone's function dictates their form to a very large degree.
Very, very, very huge, if not all. Just because we have other things like proprioception, and some people are more in tune with their proprioception. Some people prefer it. With this Keltman thing, I just realized that one of the most important things as well is the padding and the proprioception that it gives you. And if everyone had the same proprioception, right?
Well, we only need one durometer of foam.
Yeah. So how many shore meters does it have? That is my third or fourth study. To get a shore meter here and then to just measure, because it is one of the categories, okay? And you with a simple questionnaire, I've developed a questionnaire. With a simple questionnaire, you can organize those categories, and that's the thing. Let's say we have 7 categories, and you say, how can we pick a saddle with 7 different categories, okay? Because it's the order of the categories that matters, and you determine that order using a questionnaire. So if someone says, I hate my saddle, it really hurts. Do you have any chafing? Do you have any ingrowing hair? So try to find out, try to understand if they have soft tissue damage. And if they say, no, nothing like that, it just really hurts on the back, okay? So this is someone who probably will benefit from a softer saddle, okay?
Right.
Doesn't suffer from that shearing force that destroys the soft tissue.
Right.
Doesn't suffer from friction in the perineal or something like that, but does suffer a lot from discomfort, from perhaps bruising on the rear of the saddle. And then if they have to run afterwards, I mean, that's where the hamstrings insert. That's where, if you have inflamed hamstrings, you're not going to be able to run. You're not going to be able to
right.
And so
there's other factors which will contribute to that as well. Like typically, and we all see this, I think, in our practices, is someone who is, say, overly high in the saddle is going to sit. It might not be a bad saddle that they're on. It's just, a saddle in a bad position. Yeah. Where they're actually, and that's I think that's the multifactorial problems that we run into is, you can have it might be the right saddle for somebody, just it's too high and they've got this shift going on, or they've got this rotational element going on, or Yeah, exactly. Or sometimes it's a unilateral issue. It's not bilateral, where somebody has overly tight, say, an overly tight right hip flexor, and that's actually pushing their left ilium backwards all the time. And they're going, no, it's only on my left side. And we're like, yeah, the issue's on your right, but it's symptomatic on your left-hand side.
It transpires to the other side, which is obvious. If you have a string and it's smaller on one side, when you put it on this side, it's just going to go off-centered. And the dynamics is really important. That we can measure stuff statically, and I've stopped doing that because as soon as I can, I get them on the bike. I just want to see them on the bike. And I do a little depending on what you tell me, I do some evaluation, some physical evaluation, some tests, like the Trendelenburg test that measures the how the hip flexors can keep the hip leveled. All sorts of tests on the hip flexors, on the gluteus, etc., depending on what guided by what they say. But then I want to see them on the bike because some of those issues go away. One of those issues that really goes away is the leg length difference. Okay.
Right. Because we're very good at adapting to that sort of stuff.
Yeah. We have so many strategies for that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we're not, because what is a leg length differential at extension is much less at degrees of flexion.
Yeah.
Right? It's just hasn't manifested itself. So someone who could have, 5 meters in the leg length differential at extension, that's really going to be very difficult to measure in dynamic pedaling at degrees of flexion.
Yeah, because you have all sorts of strategies from that leg that has the difference, and from the other leg as well. Right. You also have, always to keep your vestibular centers, aligned. That's our purpose, and we have many strategies to do that. But there was a question that remained, and I can't remember, about the TT saddles. Well, do you remember what you said?
About the noses on them, or about where they're going to be positioned as far as saddle height? And I mean, my experience with TT saddles is a lot of the time I'm trying to get the saddle out of the way of the pelvis, because I find a lot of people interact with their saddle too much, the more anterior rotation they place on it. Well, you see a lot of people just constantly pushing backwards into that saddle because the saddle is too far forward, because the manufacturers have all started to, been obsessed with these super steep seat tube angles, or virtual seat tube angles. And so there's a lot of poor interplay between the pelvis and the saddle, especially in that aerodynamic or time trial position.
Yeah, and this is what I did today. This is a seat tube from one customer, from the other customer, just because the saddle was too high, couldn't bring it down. It was hitting the frame, because it was untouched. It was, and they've been riding it for years like that. Yes, and I just wanted to lower it 10 mil. It's not much. Wanted to lower it 10 mil. It was hitting the frame. I couldn't lower it. It was way too high. It was, they had a huge plantar flexion, just trying to grab the bottom. And when you measure them on the saddle, it's so unstable because you're attached to the shoes. So obviously the pelvis is going to do that as you are at the bottom on one side, because it's attached to the pedals and it's attached to the hip. So you really need to get to the bottom, right? So you do that.
Right, absolutely.
Too high.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's also the element of self-selecting your leg extension, and you will do that because by sliding forward on the saddle or shortening your effective torso extension, just to achieve what is, closer to your optimal leg extension. And within that, that creates its own problems. You come forward onto a narrower part of the saddle, you come off support of the bony elements of the pelvis that you're sitting on, and there's just so many other factors in play.
So what do you do? Do you try to work with the client's saddle, or do you just, let's change and see if you are okay with a different saddle?
Yeah, that's a very interesting. Initially, my approach is always going to be to work with what we have, to get them to a place where I feel that they're pedaling correctly, and then address the saddle, after that point. So get them to a good place of biomechanics, because one of the things I see a lot is sometimes what might present itself as a instability in the pelvis could be driven by, one, the saddle could be too high.
Yeah.
And they could be sliding forward on the saddle to try and shorten their leg length. But then a lot of people I see have poor pelvic stability.
Yeah.
And so they might be in the right pedaling position. Like I can think of one client right away, and it's a female client, and she's a very high-level age grouper, Kona, possibly high-placing Kona finisher. That's what her goal is. So she has a substantial output on the bike, but her ability to create force is greater than her ability to stabilize her pelvis.
Yeah.
So
you think that's because she's a really powerful runner?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Well, she rotates her pelvis out of the way when she puts force down into the pedal, because the crank's not going to bend. Crank's not getting out of the way. Your legs are very stable, and the force vector on your lower extremity is very straight. Or, it doesn't, it's more difficult to deviate off the force vector.
Yeah.
So what it does is just take pelvis and give it a bit of a tweak out each time. So she eternally suffers from saddle sores, but her pedaling mechanic is very, very smooth, and you only see the movement function come in as we up the load. Obviously as fatigue plays a greater part in the pedaling. Yeah,
look, and I agree. I think I always work with what the client brings in, even though I have all of this. But because I'm completely unbiased. Okay, right. I don't sell these saddles.
Right.
I couldn't care less where they get them. All of them are updated. As soon as a brand outputs a saddle, I get these ones, I sell them secondhand, give them away, and I get the new ones, because I always want to have everything updated so that when they look for it, they can find it.
Right.
So I'm completely unbiased, but they have a saddle already. I want to make sure that they don't have to, waste more money buying a different saddle if we can make that one work. If that saddle doesn't work, sure, we can go for a different saddle. But sometimes it comes to a point where, you have those mechanical and kinematic things going on, and they just can't work on them. They just can't work. They don't have the time. They don't have the ability to work on them, the knowledge, etc., etc. When that happens, then we need to change the saddle to suit them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's sort of get the mechanics right first, and that raises the question about, do you feel there is a category of saddle which tends to be more of a catch-all than other type? Like, one of the jokes I make is that nobody sets out to build a bad saddle.
No.
With the exception of physique. I think it's their purpose in life. But I think there's some saddles, are better than others for the majority of the population.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time I'll see saddles that it makes no sense to me how somebody stays stable on a particular saddle.
Yeah.
Like, they're either, for some reason they're like, oh no, this saddle really works and it's super comfortable for me. I'm just like, whoa, I have no idea how you stay comfortable on that saddle and create power through it. But those people tend to be the outlier, not the standard population. And my experience has always been that a flatter saddle, which is a traditional length, tends to offer the largest sweet spot within which someone can move, because understanding that we do move on the saddle a reasonable amount throughout the duration of a ride.
Yeah.
We're not locked in a position.
Yeah. So I find that, but then that's a physics saddle.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I find that 1%, maybe less than 1% of the people that do my saddle service will like this one. Less than one.
Right. Right.
I've had maybe, I don't know, 1 in 200 clients that likes this saddle.
Well, and we both know colleagues of ours who swear by that saddle, and it's the majority of the saddle that they present to customers.
I present them to customers. I just can't get anyone to like them. I present them to everyone.
Right.
And I present them, and I have people coming in with SMPs, because we have a bike fitter here in Glasgow who swears by SMPs.
Right.
And so they come in here with SMPs because they can't ride SMPs.
Right, because they can't get comfortable in that saddle.
Yeah. No, yeah, they can't. And it's actually, incidentally, it's the only saddle that has some scientific merit. Papers. Well, not anymore, because I'm going to outhoop mine, and I have other saddles on that paper. But that tends to be very true. Even though we have the Stealth Pro, which is a curved saddle at the bottom, you don't use this bit.
Yes,
you
correct.
use the bit that's completely flat. And for me, there's two things. One is area.
Right.
You have to have area.
Surface area. Contact surface area. Yeah.
Yeah. So we want to reduce that pressure. Area works in an inverse relationship to pressure. We want to reduce the pressure. It has to increase the area, because the force is the same. It's your weight. It's not going to change.
An elephant wearing stilettos.
There you go. Yeah. One is the area. The other one is that. Can you move on it? Backward, forward, down, up, etc. Are you free to move on it?
Right.
And then all the other categories come into place. Is it soft for you to move? Is it etc. Is the tumble home? Is the tumble home good? So tumble home is a term from shipbuilding, the way that ships. So if you have a ship going through the water like that, the tumble home is the degree. It's the angle of the ship bow as it comes off the water. Okay, and some ships have a very shallow tumble home. Some ships have a very steep tumble home, right? Like speed ships will have like this. Cargo containers will have a tumble home like that. And you can see the tumble home. And fabric saddles is the perfect. Bear with me.
He's got it buried somewhere back there.
Bear with me. Oh,
well, I think that sort of raises the question as well, is that do we feel that there's any bad saddles out there?
Oh, yeah. So, just want to show you. This is the same saddle.
Big difference.
Is the fabric scoop.
The fabrics, yeah.
Yeah, there are. This is a perfect example of two types of tumble home. Why can't I get this straight? Oh, because it's inverted.
It's reversed, yeah.
Oh, it's reversed. Yeah. That way. Idiot.
You're playing with your head there.
So this goes down, that one doesn't. It stays completely flat, yeah?
Yep.
And this one goes down. So that's the tumble home. That's what I mean. So if you turn them around, it's like the ship going through the water. And this one is a cargo ship, and that's a speedboat.
Right. And
that tumble home is going to play with the angle of your usual rummy.
Yeah, I think as well, some people who have better pelvic stability will tolerate a saddle which is suboptimal for them. Then some people who have poor pelvic stability require it to be the exact right saddle in the exact right position for them to get stable. Yeah.
So pelvic stability is so important because of that soft tissue damage. Okay, the less you have that soft tissue damage, the less you suffer. And something with our bodies is if the body thinks it's close to an injury, it will It will stop the production of power. It will
sure,
innervate,
self-regulating. We have a very good control mechanism to self-preservation.
It will inhibit contraction. It will inhibit muscle contraction.
Well, when we talk about in the movement world, we talk about when pain is present, movement patterns change.
Yeah.
And that's really what happens. You'll start to favor one side versus the other, or you'll just inhibit the contractile force. Well, there's a great example. In movement, we talk about joint centration. Yeah. So how well is the joint centered? When your joint gets out of center, the body doesn't stop force delivery transfer through it. It just limits force transfer through it. And it's that same position. When we get somebody in the right position, they can apply more load in the right joint position.
Yeah. So stability is really important for that. Because without stability, you can incur an injury. And when you start to incur an injury, you change your patterns of muscle contraction and, inhibition, excitation and inhibition between agonist and antagonist and stuff like that. And and actually, just before we leave, I just want to share the same image that we had, this one. And it's even greater than we thought. This is the end of one ischial tuberosity. That bit, okay?
Okay.
Ischial tuberosity of the right. That's ischial tuberosity of the left, okay? This is huge. How much it moves just by lifting your femur. It's huge how much you move. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that because the pelvis is three sort of distinct components, and each ilium is moving independently to an extent.
Yeah.
Each side of the pelvis, that is. The pelvis is made up of the sacrum and two iliums, the left and the right. And they do tend to have independent rotation or movement more in all planes than they're not moving as a single component. Yeah.
So this is perfectly parallel, sagittal. This is the sagittal cut. Yeah. And you can see, look at the acetabulum. Look at how much it moves just by lifting your femur.
Wow. Okay.
And that, I'll have the figures in the paper, but that is just by lifting your leg.
Right.
You're doing that. Now imagine that you also, on top of that, you do that with your glutes, working in origin and inverted origin and insertion. You can do that, or with your psoas or any hip flexors. You can alter the origin and insertion and do that on top of what you already moves. It moves a lot.
Yeah.
So obviously you're gonna have soft tissue damage if you don't have the proper saddle, and if you don't have the proper short padding as well.
Yeah, and proper position.
Proper position, obviously.
Yeah, and it goes to be. So I think that's, we could easily talk about the pelvic stability side of things. I think that's a whole nother discussion, because my belief is that the understanding of what creates pelvic stability is wildly misunderstood, partly perpetuated by the general fitness industry, because the general perception of fitness is, strong muscles and a well-developed cardiovascular system, which is the equivalent of building a huge engine and putting it in a car which is poorly aligned with bald tires, bad suspension, and substandard brakes.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole. But I think, so when we look at seats, what do you think if people are looking for a takeaway? What's your average, because sadly, not everybody in the world has access to you and I or some of our colleagues.
Yeah.
So if somebody's looking for a seat for their bike, what do you think some sort of underlying catch-all parameters might be for someone who's looking for the ideal, for a better seat for their bike?
First, you need to write down on paper what you're looking for. So write down on paper what your pains are. Why is that seat not working for you? Once you have that, you can determine if you need, if you have pain in the front of the seat, is it soft tissue pain? Is it, that sort of pain that has soft tissue damage? Or is it just that, pain that is caused by compression of the muscles and you get bruising, which is a different sort of pain? Do you get chafing, blood, etc., 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 or not? You need to write these things down in paper and prioritize them. Yeah. So this is more important to me. That is more important to me, etc., etc. Second thing is, what are you going to use your saddle for? Is it going to be an all-rounder saddle? People, for the Celtmen, are using road bikes, and I'm fitting handlebars on road bikes, and they also want a saddle that they can feel good on the tops as they climb.
So you're putting clip-ons on normal handlebars, so it's more of a road bike setup?
Yeah, because there are straight sections they would benefit, but then it's generally uphill. A road bike is better, and they like to be on the tops as they go up. Okay, so that is going to load the rear of the saddle, but they also want to be on the handlebar, so that's going to have to be an all-rounder, and for that you need area in the front.
Right. I think you've hit on it there. I think for me that would be the number one component is we're looking for surface area. If a saddle has more surface area, and I would describe that surface area as front to back, not necessarily because, lots of people are like, oh, I want one of those big, flat, cushy saddles with a saddle cover on it because that's going to make it a comfortable saddle. But it's more about, I think, the surface area from front to back that gives you that wide window, that real estate for you to actually find your seated position. Because, your seated position changes over the duration of a ride. Where you start on that saddle will not be where you finish the ride on that saddle.
No. Yeah, and there are lots of TT saddles. This is a very good example. The Pro, what's it called? Pro something. The Aero Fuel. It's really good here, but then if they have to sit upright to go, climb up a mountain, it's really wide. It drives up the inner thighs where the hamstrings insert, and it's really painful.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just so many factors. I guess that's why we love what we do, and we are constantly coming up with more questions than we have answers.
If I am to say one thing is, when you ride a bike, you don't ride at 90 degrees, so favor surface area from the middle to the front of the saddle. And which is why the Power Pro is a bad saddle for me. It's not. It's a bad saddle for me because this is my saddle, my personal saddle, and I hate it, and I really hate it. It was very, very painful. And when I went from this one to this one, it was a breakthrough. It was just completely different. But I think
in general, I would say the largest percentage of the population that I see, that specialized saddle is not the right saddle for them.
And as with me, it's the same thing with me. They come in with the Power Pros. I had an example yesterday. 2 Power Pros. Okay, one on the road bike, one on the track bike. Road bike, fine. She loved it. It was perfect. I was happy. She was happy. I did all sorts of things that I do. I was happy with that saddle on the road bike. Same saddle on the track bike, a nightmare. She was
well because of the pelvic rotation, right? You're in the drop position all the time. Right.
On top of the bottom bracket, really aggressive. It was a bike set up for the sprint, which is 2 laps.
Sure, okay? Yeah.
But she couldn't do the sprint. Because of this, she was sitting on the nose. Wrong saddle. Completely wrong saddle.
Right.
Gave her this.
Yep.
And job done.
Problem solved.
Yeah. Now you have our area in the front, and she was like, hold on, it's a sofa here. It's not a sofa. It's just, wider than that.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with being a sofa as long as it goes fast.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Man, This is just some spectacular stuff. I'm super. So when do you think your research is going to go into peer review?
Say again?
When do you think your research is going to go into peer review?
I'm going to try and submit it by the end of May. And hopefully, things are faster nowadays, but back in the days when I started 10 years ago, when I started publishing in the scientific community, papers would take 6 months to a year to, but now you can get a paper out in 3 months.
Yeah, so we probably expect to see that research sort of coming out later half the third quarter of the year, fourth quarter.
Open access, I hope. Most of the journals are not happy with open access. I'm not going to pay for open access myself. I think it's a given right of everybody to have access to research. I think they have more than enough money to make some papers open access. I can't pay for open access. It's really expensive. And I don't have an institution behind me. I don't have a university behind me to pay for the open access. So that might complicate things in the publishing.
I certainly look forward to seeing that and coming out and having a read of that. But once again, Nuno, I really appreciate you coming on board and having a chat about this and sort of going through some of the finer points of what we're trying to get people to understand about saddles, because I think it's vitally important. In my opinion, it's the one component on a bicycle which is the most wildly misunderstood. And if you look in a bike store, there's more variations of saddle than any other component on the bicycle. So it's for me, it points to the fact that the manufacturers have very little understanding of what they're actually trying to achieve. And they're basically just using a scattergun approach of putting heaps of products out there, and the consumer ends up sort of by self-selection finding one which tends to work for them.
Yeah, I agree. I feel a bit of an imposter because I think this is, common sense. I think this is really common sense. But I've been finding out that common sense is not that common nowadays. Not that common,
for sure.
But it's really common sense stuff. I mean, but that's why I feel a bit of an imposter to be called a specialist in saddles, because this is just common sense.
It seems very common to you and I because we do it, but to a lot of people it is, it's really eye-opening when we talk about this sort of stuff. And that's why, that's what drives me to do more Fit Matters podcasts, to get people to really see the way we them, and not that I want agreement, but I want people to be informed and have an understanding.
Yeah. When you do that podcast on the hip stability, podcast on the hip stability, you should bring someone who specializes on hip and the pelvic floor, and from a medical perspective and from a physiotherapy perspective, not necessarily from cycling. Because I would love to have a different perspective from guys that look into it properly.
I've got a couple of people in the wings for that. One chiropractor, one physical therapy, who are both cyclists, but they just come at it from a different perspective and understanding. And I think that's really important.
Exactly.
All righty. Well, Dr. Nuno Gana, thanks once again for being part of this. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody enjoyed listening to our ramblings for another 60 minutes. If you want to know more, please stay tuned to our channels and keep your eyes and ears open for the next episode of Fit Matters. Thank you once again, and we'll see you all again soon.